At my graduation, I collapsed. Doctors called my parents. They never answered. Hours passed. Everyone left. Then one person walked in, my grandpa. Days later, still in the hospital, I saw a message from Mom. "Why didn't you tell us it was serious?" I stared at the screen and realized everything. That memory plays on a loop in my head. It starts with the heat of the stage lights and ends with the cold realization that silence is actually a screaming answer. The stage lights were blinding. White, hot suns drilled into the auditorium ceiling. My polyester gown felt like a suffocating second skin, trapping sweat against my back. I gripped the wooden podium until my knuckles turned the color of old bone. A thrumming pressure built behind my left eye, rhythmic and sharp. Like a tiny hammer chipping away at my skull. I tried to focus on my index cards, but the black ink swam like oil on water. Something was strictly, terrifyingly wrong. I forced my head up, squinting through the haze. Thousands of faces stared back, a sea of proud parents holding phones and bouquets. My eyes automatically drifted to row 3, seats 10 and 11. I had reserved them months ago. I had texted the confirmation numbers twice just yesterday. They were empty. 2 void spaces in a crowded room. Dark gaps like missing teeth in a smile. My chest tightened, not from the pain in my head, but from the hollow ache. Then I saw him. Way in the back near the glowing red exit signs, a solitary figure in a gray suit stood leaning on a cane. Grandpa Arthur. He was not taking pictures. He was not smiling with that performative joy everyone else wore today. He was watching me with an intensity that cut through the distance. He raised one hand, a small, grim wave acknowledging I was there. He knew they hadn't come. I saw it in his jaw. I cleared my throat to speak, to deliver the speech on resilience I had practiced in the mirror for weeks. "Fellow graduates," I croaked. The microphone screeched, a high-pitched feedback loop that pierced my eardrums like a needle. The floor tilted violently to the left. The auditorium spun, transforming the audience into a smear of aggressive colors. My knees buckled. I didn't feel the impact when I hit the hardwood, but I heard the collective gasp of 3,000 people. Darkness rushed in from the edges of my vision, narrowing the world to a pinprick of light. Voices sounded underwater, distorted and slow. "He is out," someone shouted. "Get a medic." A stranger's hand pressed against my neck, checking for a pulse. "Does anyone have his parents' number?" A frantic voice asked above me. I tried to answer, to tell them not to bother, but my tongue was lead. Then everything went black, and I prayed I wouldn't wake up. Consciousness returned in fragments, sharp and disjointed. The rhythmic beeping of a monitor acted as a metronome for the throbbing in my skull. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent glare, my mouth tasting like dry cotton and copper. To my right, a figure slumped in a vinyl chair. Grandpa Arthur was asleep, his head resting awkwardly on his chest. He was still wearing the gray suit from graduation. It was rumpled now, stained with coffee, a testament to a vigil kept for 3 days. A nurse bustled in, checking the IV bag hanging above me. She offered a tight, sympathetic smile when she saw my eyes open. "Welcome back," she whispered, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Grandpa. "You gave us quite a scare." She explained the surgery efficiently. They had removed a benign mass pressing on my frontal lobe. "It was successful," she said, but the urgency had been absolute. I tried to nod, but my neck was stiff. I felt incredibly heavy. "My parents," I rasped, the words scratching my throat. The nurse's professional demeanor faltered for a split second. She busied herself with the bedsheets, avoiding direct eye contact. "We tried them," she said carefully. "The hospital protocol is to call emergency contacts immediately. We called about 40 times before your grandfather authorized the procedure. 40 times. The number hung in the sterile air between us. 40 times they had looked at a ringing phone and decided it wasn't worth their time." Grandpa shifted, snorting awake. His eyes landed on me, and the exhaustion melted into profound relief. "Ralph," he breathed, reaching for my hand. His skin was papery and warm. "You are still with us." I squeezed back, needing that anchor. But my gaze drifted to the bedside table where my phone sat charging. The black screen was a void I needed to fill with answers. I pointed at it weakly. Grandpa hesitated, his expression darkening, but he handed it over. I unlocked the screen with trembling fingers. The notifications bar was a cluttered mess. There were dozens of missed calls from Dad, but the timestamps stopped me cold. They didn't start 3 days ago when I was being wheeled into surgery. They started 1 hour ago. For 72 hours, while surgeons cut into my brain, my phone had been silent. They only started calling once the danger had theoretically passed. A cold pit formed in my stomach, heavier than the tumor. I ignored the red bubbles and opened Instagram. I needed to know where they were when they weren't answering. The first image on my feed was a punch to the gut. It was a selfie, bright and saturated. Mom and Dad were flanking my brother Brad, all three of them holding salt-rimmed margaritas. The geolocation tag read Cabo San Lucas. The ocean behind them was a mocking, brilliant blue. They looked tan, relaxed, and utterly unburdened by my absence. I zoomed in on their smiles, looking for a trace of guilt, but found none. Then I read the caption underneath. "Celebrating Brad's new journey!" Finally, some relaxation. It continued with a line that stole the air from my lungs. Thanks to Ralph for holding down the fort at home, so we could do this. They hadn't just left me. They had rewritten the narrative to make my abandonment look like a favor. They weren't missing, they were hiding in plain sight. The phone buzzed in my hand, vibrating like a trapped wasp against my palm. I stared at the screen as new messages stacked up, pushing the Cabo photo out of view. "Call us immediately," Dad wrote. Then another, "We're flying back now." And a third, "Why is Grandpa answering your phone?" The sudden attentiveness felt jarring, almost violent. It didn't match the silence of the last 3 days. It felt desperate. Something other than concern was driving this panic. Grandpa Arthur reached over and plucked the phone from my weak grip. He didn't look at the screen. He placed it face down on the bedside table with a deliberate, heavy clack. "That is enough of that," he said, his voice rough with lack of sleep. "You need rest, Ralph, not their noise." He sat back, smoothing the creases in his trousers. But his hands were shaking slightly. It wasn't from age, it was from a suppressed, simmering rage. "Why are they coming back?" I asked, watching his face. "They didn't answer when the surgeon called. They didn't answer when I was in the ICU." The question hung there. If they were truly worried, they would have called days ago. This sudden U-turn didn't make sense. It felt calculated. Grandpa looked out the window at the gray hospital parking lot. He rubbed his jaw, the stubble audibly rasping against his palm. He knew something I didn't. "They aren't coming because of the tumor," Grandpa said finally, turning back to me. His eyes were hard, devoid of the grandfatherly warmth I was used to. "They are coming because I sent them a picture." I frowned, confused. "A picture of me? In the bed?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I sent them a photo of a document. A bank statement, to be precise." The air in the room shifted. It grew colder, sharper. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I texted your father a balance sheet for a trust I set up years ago." He unfolded it, smoothing the edges. He didn't care that his son's skull was being opened up. But he cared deeply when he realized his access to this account might be severed. The words hit me like physical blows. The panic in Dad's texts wasn't fear for me. It was fear for his wallet. I looked at the ceiling, tracing the pattern of the acoustic tiles. It all made sick sense. The sudden urgency. The flight home. The demand to speak to me. I wasn't a son to them. I was a leveraged asset that was about to default. If I died, or if Grandpa intervened, the money stopped. That was the emergency. Not the brain surgery. Not the coma. The emergency was a potential interruption in their cash flow. Grandpa leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I told them something else, Ralph. I told them you were awake this morning." He paused, letting the weight of the lie settle. "And I told them you were signing a power of attorney, naming me as your sole beneficiary. That is why they are on a plane." He patted my hand. "It wasn't love that booked their flight. It was greed. And they were coming to stop me." I stared at the bank statement Grandpa had unfolded. The numbers didn't make any sense. It showed a balance that looked more like a phone number than a savings account. "Grandpa," I whispered, struggling to sit up. "Dad always told me you were broke." He said that was why I had to work 3 jobs during college. The lie I had lived with for 4 years began to unravel. The room felt smaller. He said you couldn't help us. Your father has a flexible relationship with the truth, Grandpa said, sitting back in the vinyl chair. When you boys started college, I wrote 2 checks. One for Brad, one for you. Identical amounts, enough to cover tuition for 4 years. My stomach turned over. I remembered the nights I skipped dinner to save $5. He told me you didn't give anything? I said. Grandpa nodded grimly. He took your check and cashed it. Con, he spent it on Brad's legal fees, Grandpa clarified, seeing my confusion. That DUI in his sophomore year, the one they told you was a parking dispute, that cost $20,000 to make disappear. He gestured to the window with disgust. And the boat. That ridiculous boat sitting in their driveway. That was your junior year tuition. I felt sick. My sweat, my exhaustion, my missed meals. They funded Brad's mistakes and Dad's toys. I wasn't just invisible, I was being harvested. I knew he would do it, Grandpa said softly. That is the worst part. I knew my son. He tapped the document on the tray table. So I started this. The Freedom Fund. Every month since you were born, I put money aside here. Legally separate, untouchable by him, mostly. He looked at me with fierce pride. This matures today. Con. It is enough to buy a house, start a firm, or just disappear. It is your exit ticket, Ralph. I looked at the balance again. It wasn't just money, it was time. Con. It was every shift I wouldn't have to work, every bill I wouldn't have to panic over. For the first time, I saw a version of my life that didn't involve scraping for their approval. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because if you knew, you might have told them, Grandpa replied. And if they knew, they would have guilted it out of you. But Grandpa wasn't smiling. He pulled a second document from his jacket pocket. It was a transfer form, legal and intimidating. Con. There is a catch, he warned. Technically, until you sign this release, your parents are listed as custodians. If they get here before you sign, Con, if they can prove you are medically incapacitated from the surgery, they can freeze this. My heart hammered against my ribs. The clock wasn't just ticking, it was counting down to their arrival. He uncapped a heavy fountain pen and placed it in my hand. The metal felt cold against my feverish skin. They land in 2 hours, Grandpa said, checking his watch. If you sign this, the money moves to a private trust under your name alone. They get nothing. But you have to choose to cut them off. I stared at the blank signature line. I held the pen that would sign my freedom or sign away my future. I capped the pen and slid the document under my pillow just as the heavy door swung open. Mom led the charge, her heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum. She looked like a walking postcard from Cabo, bronze skin glowing against a white linen blouse. Dad trailed behind her, dragging suitcases that smelled faintly of tequila and duty-free perfume. Brad brought up the rear, eyes glued to his phone. They brought the noise of the outside world into the sterile quiet of the ICU, making the room feel suddenly suffocating. Mom rushed to the bedside, a sob escaping her throat that sounded entirely rehearsed. "Oh, my poor baby," she wailed, throwing her arms around me. She squeezed my shoulders, ignoring the fresh bandage on my head. Her embrace didn't feel like comfort, it felt like ownership. She pulled back, her eyes dry despite the noise. "Why didn't you say it was this bad, Ralph?" Con, "We would have come sooner if we knew you weren't exaggerating." The accusation was subtle, buried under layers of fake concern, but it stung. Dad didn't hug me. He stood at the foot of the bed, checking his watch as if he had a meeting to catch. "Glad you are okay, son," he said, though he looked more annoyed than relieved. "Hell of a scare. Cost us a fortune to change the flights last minute." Brad finally looked up from his screen, chewing gum loudly. "Yeah, man, you look rough. Nice haircut." Con, though. He smirked at my shaved head. They were treating my brain surgery like a minor inconvenience to their schedule. Grandpa Arthur sat in the corner, Con a silent sentinel watching the performance. Dad acknowledged him with a curt nod before turning his attention back to me. The pleasantries evaporated faster than water on hot pavement. Con. "So," Dad started, his voice dropping an octave. "Grandpa sent us a very confusing text about some bank paperwork. He tried to sound casual, but his eyes darted around the room, hunting for the document I had hidden. We need to clear that up before things get messy with the lawyers. Mom chimed in, smoothing the blanket over my legs. We're a family, Ralph. Con, we handle these things together. She smiled, but her teeth were clenched. Grandpa is getting old. He gets confused about finances. Con, we just want to make sure your assets are protected properly. She used the word protected when she really meant controlled. I saw the manipulation clearly now, stripped of the love I used to project onto it. They weren't here to hold my hand. They were here to hold the pen. It's not confusing, Dad, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Grandpa showed me the trust. I know about the tuition money you stole. The room went dead silent. Dad's face turned a mottled shade of red. Stole. That is a harsh word, Ralph. We used family resources to keep this family afloat. He took a step closer, looming over the bed. And as your custodians, we need to manage this windfall. Con, you aren't in a state to make big decisions. He reached for the bedside drawer. Wait, so there is actual cash. Brad piped up, stepping forward. He looked between Dad and me, eyes wide with greed. Because the truck payments are backing up, and I really need to get that lift kit installed before the rush. He looked at me like I was a walking ATM. You can help me out, right, bro? Since you are rich now. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Dad froze, Mom looked away, and I finally understood my place in this family. Brad's request for a lift kit hung in the antiseptic air like a foul odor. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing my brother's face. No, I said, the word tasting like iron. I am not paying for your truck. I am not paying for anything. Dad's jaw muscles bunched tight enough to snap. Don't be selfish, he snapped, stepping closer to the bed rails. We are in a crisis here. We need liquidity, not your teenage rebellion. It is not rebellion to keep what is mine, I countered, sliding my hand under the pillow. Dad's eyes followed the movement, predatory and sharp. Give me the papers, Ralph, he demanded, extending a hand that used to discipline me. You are not thinking clearly. The medication has you confused. I pulled the folder out but pressed it against my chest. I am clearer than I have ever been, I said. Grandpa told me everything. I know about the 2 checks. Grandpa is a bitter old man trying to poison you against us. Mom interjected, her voice shrill. She touched her pearl necklace, a nervous tic I had watched for years. We used that money for the family. For the greater good, I laughed, a dry, painful sound that hurt my incision. The greater good was a boat, I asked. The greater good was keeping Brad out of jail. Dad slammed his hand on the tray table, making the water pitcher rattle violently. Grandpa finally stood up, his cane hitting the floor with a decisive thud. The 15th of October, he said clearly. They all turned to look at him. That is Ralph's birthday. You haven't called him on that day in 4 years. He took a step forward. May 12th, his graduation. You were at the airport. He pointed the cane at Dad like a weapon. You didn't sacrifice for the family, Douglas. You sacrificed one son to spoil the other. And now the bill is due. Mom turned on him, her face twisting into something ugly and raw. You have no right to judge us, she hissed. You sat in your ivory tower judging me since the day I married Douglas. She spun back to me, her eyes wild. You are just like him, Ralph cold. Calculating. You keep score of everything just like he does. It wasn't just anger, it was hatred. She looked at me and didn't see a son. She saw an enemy she had harbored. That is it, isn't it? I asked softly. You don't hate me for what I did, you hate me for who I look like. Mom didn't deny it. She trembled, her carefully applied mascara beginning to smudge. Every time I look at you, I see his judgment. She spat, gesturing at Grandpa. I see her eyes. Eleanor's eyes. She covered her mouth, but the truth was out. I was a living ghost of the in-laws she despised. I never stood a chance. The revelation washed over me, cold and clarifying. All the years I spent trying to be perfect, trying to earn a smile, were wasted effort. I could have won a Nobel Prize, and she still would have only seen Grandpa's chin or Grandma's eyes. I wasn't a person to her, I was a mirror reflecting her insecurities. The final thread binding me to them. The desperate hope for their love snapped. I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt entirely, terrifyingly free. I uncapped the heavy fountain pen. The black ink looked permanent and absolute. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice void of emotion. "I am just like him." I smoothed the paper on the plastic tray. Con. "And I am going to do exactly what he would do." I signed my name on the line. The loops of my signature felt like locking a door. "It is done," I said, holding it up. Con. "Grandpa is my power of attorney. You have no claim here." Dad lunged. It wasn't a fatherly gesture. It was a desperate grab for the asset he was losing. "Con, you ungrateful little." His hand snagged the edge of the paper. Grandpa shouted, raising his cane, but he didn't need to strike. Two security guards, Con summoned by the nurse who had been watching the monitors, burst through the door. "Step away from the patient," the lead guard bellowed. Dad froze, his hand inches from my chest. Con, his face a mask of impotent fury. "Get them out," I said to the guard, my voice sounding older than my 22 years. "They are bothering me." Mom started to cry again. Real tears of panic this time. Brad looked bored, already texting someone new. Dad glared at me, a vein pulsing in his forehead. "You are dead to us," he sneered as they were escorted out. "Good," I whispered to the empty room as the door clicked shut. For the first time, I wasn't apologizing for existing. 2 weeks later, the silence in my new apartment felt like a luxury item. Grandpa had used the fund to rent a ground floor unit with wide windows and 0 stairs. My head still throbbed in the mornings, a dull reminder of the surgery, but the scar was healing into a jagged pink line. I sat on a second-hand sofa, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight. It was the first time in my life I wasn't waiting for a shouting match to start. Then, a hesitant knock shattered the peace. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Mom stood on the welcome mat, holding a bubbling tray of lasagna wrapped in foil. She wore oversized sunglasses, likely hiding puffiness from crying or lack of sleep. "Ralph," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "I didn't know if you were up." She stepped forward, expecting me to move aside, but I stayed planted in the doorway. She faltered, the aluminum tray crinkling in her grip. This was the soft approach. "I just wanted to make sure you were eating," she said, eyeing the bare walls behind me. "This place is cozy. A bit dark, maybe." She set the food on a small entryway table. "Uninvited. Your father is a wreck, you know. He hasn't slept since the hospital." She paused, waiting for me to ask how he was, or to apologize for the scene with security. I said nothing. I just watched her perform, realizing her kindness always came with an invisible invoice attached. She fidgeted with her rings, the silence stretching until it became uncomfortable. "Look, honey, we made some mistakes," she admitted, though her eyes didn't meet mine. "But Brad is in real trouble this time. It isn't just a truck payment. He borrowed money from some bad people." She swallowed hard. "We took a second mortgage on the house to help him, but the rates adjusted. We might lose the home, Ralph, the home you grew up in." There it was, the ask. A cold clarity washed over me, sharper than the sterile hospital air. They didn't want me back. They wanted a cosigner. My entire existence to them was an insurance policy against their own poor choices. "You aren't losing the house because of me," I said calmly. "You are losing it because you light yourself on fire to keep Brad warm." She flinched as if slapped. "I am not your retirement plan, Mom, and I am definitely not Brad's bailout fund." Her face hardened, the mask of maternal concern slipping to reveal the desperation underneath. "Family helps family," she snapped, abandoning the whisper. "After everything we sacrificed for you." I picked up the lasagna. It was still warm, smelling of garlic and guilt. "You sacrificed me," I corrected her. "You left me on a stage to die so you could drink margaritas." I shoved the tray into her chest. She grabbed it instinctively, stumbling back a step onto the concrete walkway. "If you close this door," she warned, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear, "you are on your own. No holidays. No birthdays. We will wash our hands of you." It was meant to be a threat, a terrifying ultimatum to bring the wayward child to heel. But to me, it sounded like a promise. "I was on my own the minute I hit that floor," I said. "I am just making it official." I reached for the doorknob. I didn't wait for her response. I slammed the door, the latch clicking with a finality that echoed in my chest. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up my phone. One by one, I went through my contacts. Mom, Dad, Brad. I blocked every number, every email address, every social media account. With each tap of the screen, a heavy chain fell away from my shoulders. I was effectively orphaning myself, and the only grief I felt was for the time I had wasted. A sharp rap on the window made me jump. It wasn't Mom. It was Mrs. Higgins, my elderly neighbor from the unit next door. She waved a bony hand. I opened the window. "Sorry to bother you, dear," she chirped. "I just wanted to say your father is very efficient." I frowned. "My father?" She nodded vigorously. "Yes, he came by with a tow truck this morning while you were sleeping. Said he was selling your sedan for you. Such a helpful man." My knees went weak, and I sank onto the floor. The sedan was in Dad's name to save on insurance, but I had paid every single note. They hadn't come to visit. They had come to liquidate the last thing they could touch. I crawled to the window and looked out at the empty parking spot where my car used to be. I watched Mom's SUV drive away, taillights fading. They took the car, but they left me my life. That was a fair trade. 2 years later, the drafting table in my office overlooks the city skyline, not a hospital parking lot. The scar on my head is invisible now, covered by hair I finally styled the way I wanted. Grandpa Arthur lives in the guest suite of the house I bought last autumn. He spends his days gardening and critiquing my blueprints with a sharp, loving eye. I finished the latest design for a library annex, feeling the satisfaction of work that belongs solely to me. My phone buzzed, but I didn't flinch. It was just a client, not a crisis. My assistant walked in, holding a thick cream envelope with visible hesitation. "This came for you, Ralph. There is no return address." I recognized the handwriting instantly. The sharp, aggressive loops of my father's penmanship. My stomach tightened, a phantom reflex from a past life, but it passed quickly. I sliced it open with a letter opener. There was no "Dear Ralph," no apology for the stolen car or the silence. It started mid-sentence. "We are restructuring the family trust and require your signature for a loan." He wasn't writing to a son, he was writing to a bank. I didn't read past the first line. I didn't need to know if they lost the house or if Brad had crashed another truck. Those were plot points in a tragedy I was no longer starring in. I walked to the industrial shredder in the corner of the room. I fed the heavy paper into the teeth, watching Douglas's handwriting turn into meaningless confetti. There was no anger, which surprised me. Anger implies connection. Anger implies that their actions still hold weight. I felt nothing but the hum of the machine. I was finally truly indifferent. That evening, the community center was packed with people who actually wanted to be there. Grandpa Arthur sat on stage, adjusting his tie, looking terrified and regal. He was receiving the Pillar of the Community award for the scholarship fund he started with the remainder of his savings. I sat in the front row, seat 1, directly in his line of sight. I wasn't invisible here. When they called his name, the applause was thunderous. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked right at me, his eyes crinkling with a pride that didn't ask for a receipt. He leaned into the microphone, his voice wavering slightly with age, but strong in spirit. "They say you build a legacy for your children," he told the room, "but sometimes your children build you." He raised the crystal plaque toward me. I clapped until my hands stung, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with stage lights. I used to think I collapsed at graduation because I was weak, broken by a tumor and rejection. I realized now that I hadn't collapsed from weakness. I collapsed because I had been carrying 3 grown adults on my back for a lifetime. Later, while waiting for the valet, I idly scrolled through social media on a burner account I rarely checked. A post from Brad popped up. He was asking for a roommate in a rough part of town, claiming he was between blessings. No likes, no comments. I didn't feel a spike of glee or a pang of guilt. I just swiped past it and locked the phone. The valet brought my car around, a vehicle solely in my name. I got in and drove home. I finally answered the question of who I am. I am the one who stayed standing.